Good morning or afternoon, folks, depending on where you're dialed in from. We've got an exciting webinar for you today. There's going to be two parts to today's webinar with a portion to start on rescheduling and regulatory updates with myself and Dave Culver. We're going to treat it somewhat like a podcast. So it'll be somewhat conversational between Dave and I. And from there, we will move into part two, where we'll be talking about investing in this current landscape, discussing what we are up to here at Key, current opportunities, pipeline opportunities, etc. There will be a chance for some Q&A after part one with Dave and I. Then we'll give everybody a chance to get situated for part two. I expect the webinar to last just under an hour today. But with that being said, Dave, welcome to our webinar and appreciate you taking the time to join as always. I think it's been, a really interesting 6 or so years since Key started in the industry. We've seen several different administrations come through. We've seen a lot of promises on the regulatory front. Not a ton of incremental reform on the federal side since the 2018 Farm Bill, although we've seen a lot of talk about federal reform, while simultaneously we see a lot of movement happening still at the state level. So it's a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde industry. I'd say the last couple of years have certainly been tough from a regulatory understanding, but at Key, we're very optimistic that we are certainly past the most difficult part of this industry. We're starting to see a lot of really great opportunities, not only from a valuation perspective, but also from the quality of management teams that have been able to survive and thrive in these environments. But I think with that being said, I'd love to take it away with, an intro on kind of how we got to where we are today. Cannabis as a Schedule 1, the potential for Schedule 3, and what that means going forward. And we've got a couple slides here that we can talk through. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Dave.
Yeah. Tibby, thank you so much. Good morning to everybody, or good afternoon if you're here on the East Coast. I am David Culver, based in Washington, D.C., and I have a small company, Crestwood Strategies, that is primarily focused on political consulting on a number of things, including the cannabis space. But again, thanks, Tibby, to you and the team for having me on. So the question of the day since the beginning of the year has been rescheduling, but let's back up just a little bit and remind folks what happened about this time last year, which was the president, well, then candidate Trump, put a statement up on Truth Social that had four things that he focused on. One was endorsement of the Florida ballot initiative for an adult use program. Two was support for the Safe Banking Act. Three was support for the rescheduling of cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And of course, a states' rights approach that he would like to see ultimately, and the medical benefit of the plant that he's personally witnessed. So, really a transformational change in policy that now President Trump took at that time, and I think there was a lot of people around him that got him positioned on this, including or repositioned on this, including many of the seniors that he was interacting with on the golf course in Mar-a-Lago and just generally. They were talking about how they were using this for aches and pains and sleep and help with appetite and a number of other issues that they've been able to use it as an opioid substitute. So I think that resonated with the president, and I think that his policy position was laid out very clearly this time last year. So when he took office, those of us that were here in Washington and interacting with his transition team, then his inaugural team, and then his staff as he started to slowly but surely put them into place, it was made very clear that this was not a first 100-day issue for them. They had a number of other things they wanted to tackle, but that they would get to it. And you guys have noticed probably that one of the themes of this administration, they've been doing a lot, is promises made, promises kept. So I think as it relates to rescheduling, I still think that the president intends to follow through on what he said last year. The shutting down of the government, of course, has not helped. our cause. In fact, it's delayed it. What are we at? 36 days now. Longest ever, I might add, government shutdown. But that has definitely delayed things for us because this type of announcement will be a seismic policy shift. And it's something that they're going to have to do when the time is right. So um, I have been saying for months that I'm working backwards from the end of the year in terms of when they're going to do this. I still think that's the over under on this for those that like to gamble. And I think that the government shutdown did slow the train a bit on our issue. But I'm still hopeful that we're going to see the move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 before the end of the year, Tibby.
I appreciate that, Dave. We've been through this before, I think several times where, I'd say politicians have dangled the carrot of potential reform in front of us. I guess what's different this time about this
Yeah.
administration?
Well, I think let's go back to the Biden administration. We've talked about this with you and your team before, but President Biden was put into a position by his campaign team, I believe, and I've heard from multiple sources on cannabis reform that he wasn't really comfortable with. And he's never been comfortable with the issue. You know the history of addiction that he has within his family. You know his positions that he's taken over the decades on the war, over many decades on the war on drugs. So I think this was a hard position for him to take at the end of 2020, but he took it nonetheless. They held all cannabis issues um, going into until October of 2022. So the White House was very clear with Congress that they wanted to use the announcement around rescheduling to help bolster their efforts in the midterms in 2022. So they didn't do anything. I mean, all of us that thought that we had an enormous opportunity for incremental reform with a Democratic sweep starting in 2021, including me, were wrong. And I couldn't believe, I still can't believe that the Democrats didn't do anything on this issue after preaching to the American public for literally decades. And this was the first opportunity that they had with a clean sweep to do anything. And they did nothing. So am I frustrated by this? Absolutely. I lost my job at Canopy Growth as a result of it, as did many, many of my colleagues that have lost their jobs, not only at Canopy, but at many other companies across the board. And the Democrats just they really dropped the ball in during that Congress. So fast forward to 2022, the president does make an announcement to start the scheduling, to review the possibility of where cannabis should sit on scheduling. It goes through the process, and the one thing that staff would tell me within the administration was that the only sense of timing we have here is that it should be done before he finishes his term. That was it. So many of us hung our hat on that, including me. And again, boy, was I wrong. Why was I wrong? Because the president didn't want to engage and to push on the agency, Department of Justice, Drug Enforcement Administration. He didn't want to push on them to get this done. And so it didn't. And it's been stalled ever since. But with the president, now President Trump's comments from last year, and his ability to really go to final rule immediately if he chose to, dispense with the hearing, go right to final rule. I still think that this issue is very much in play, and I'm very hopeful that we see it before the end of the year, Timmy.
So tell us a little bit about that. How could the president push this towards final ruling today versus going through the traditional process that we were, I guess, appearing to be going through during the Biden administration?
Yeah, so the process has been gone through. And I don't know if that's proper English, Tibby, but that's my answer. It did go to HHS. They spent a full year reviewing this. They put out a 200 plus page report, and they made the recommendation that cannabis should go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The second part of this was Department of Justice, which it went through their process. Now, they did add on a layer to this with the administrative law judge hearing that was not necessary, but they did do it. And that hearing, of course, ultimately stalled. So the pathway forward here is a relatively simple one, which is the president can dispense with the hearing. He can direct DOJ to go to final rule. And I would assume that they will follow his lead on this. This is a very different administration than what we saw last time around. Like everyone knows that we serve at the whim of the president, which of course every staffer or cabinet official has always served at the whim of the president. But this is a very tight-knit group out of the White House that's running every decision that they make. And if folks do not fall in line with what they want, they're out. Or as the president likes to say, you're fired. So
Yep.
I think that they will fall in line. And again, uh, many of the private conversations that I've heard secondhand with administration officials is like, I either I have an opinion on this or I don't. I have a history of conversations related to this or I don't. But if this is the will of the president, then this is what I'm going to follow through on and do.
Yep. So on August 11th, after I'd say 2.5 months of a ton of, I'd say, conservative accounts over social media, over X, basically calling for the president to fulfill his campaign promise for rescheduling, the president was asked during a press conference on whether or not he would be following through with that promise. And he turned around and looked at Pam Bondi and said that we should have an answer within a few weeks. It's been more than a few weeks now. I think we're now in to closer to a couple months. Certainly, everything in politics takes longer than anybody would appreciate. But what are your thoughts around timing? You've said before the end of the year. I think that you know based on conversations that you and I have had, nobody expects that this would be an announcement that would happen during a government shutdown. If this shutdown continues for a few more weeks, I assume that you're moving that goalpost beyond the end of this year.
Yeah, I think my timeline on the shutdown, let me tackle that one first, is somewhere before the Thanksgiving holiday. I don't think there's a politician out there that wants half of the country traveling and dealing with 3-hour lines to get through airport security, air traffic controllers that don't come to work, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they need to get the government back to work before Thanksgiving, and my timeline is somewhere between now and then. Um, as it relates to the general timing on rescheduling, the president did say a few weeks, but we've lost 5 weeks now to the government shutdown. We could lose more. We also had a very, very tragic incident, of course, with Charlie Kirk, that really the everything that the federal government was working on was paused, and they rightly took the time to mourn this individual. Um, so I think we've had some things that really did slow the train down. But if we can get the government open back up, especially in the next 7 to 10 business days, then I still think we've got a pretty good shot, Tibby, of getting this done before the end of the year.
Yeah, and funny in the meantime of all of this chaos happening in the background, Trump took the time to post on Truth Social, I guess 2 or 3 weeks ago now, about the wonderful effects of CBD on the endocannabinoid system, how cannabinoids in general can be used for regulating homeostasis within the body. I think a lot of the reasons that we see anecdotal evidence of real therapeutic benefit to cannabis was captured in that video. Our takeaway is that the administration does view this as a medicinal drug. It views this as a way for seniors to find alternative paths towards therapeutics to relieve pain, stress, anxiety, sleep disorder, whatever it may be. What are your views on that?
Well, I think the video that the president posted was a surprise to many people, including myself. But it was organized by a gentleman called Howard Kessler, and he runs a project called the Commonwealth Project that he's been working on for 7 years. He's a philanthropist that is in the state of Florida, and you saw his vision very clearly through the 3-minute video that the president posted. I personally was absolutely thrilled that he did so. I think it's really important that the American public recognizes the endocannabinoid system. They recognize that it starts to break down as you get older, and there's a way to restore it. And Howard and the Commonwealth Project laid that out very clearly in the video that the president posted. So I think that gave some real insight into where the administration is going. This is a healthcare initiative that he's launching. This has nothing to do with any sort of intoxication, hallucination. I'll just stick with intoxication, Tibby. I know the scientists hate when I say that, but any sort of intoxication. That can be reserved for the medical and the adult use programs that states currently have to offer. And this program is something that I think the administration clearly is taking a look at. Like, can we use this as part of the MAHA agenda to restore the endocannabinoid system in a way that doesn't involve opioids and any other medicines that are long-term harmful to seniors? So I really applaud Howard and everybody at the Commonwealth Project for what they've done. And I, again, for those that have not seen this, take the time to do so because it should give you some very clear insight into the way this president and this administration is thinking about the issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dave. And actually, it's a great idea. We'll be following up, as I mentioned, with a recording and a link to all of this. I think that we'll include a link to that video for all the folks that are attending today or have not, and also just a blog post we wrote over 5 years ago about the endocannabinoid system. This is something that's been known about for 30 years, but largely been ignored, at least when it comes to U.S. Practice. So, kind of jumping gears back over to the regulatory side, rescheduling, the effects of it. We'll be sharing this presentation as well, but you can see very clearly here, from a business side, what rescheduling really means for the industry. Not only does it likely lead to incremental reform from the reduced stigma, but overnight, operationally, it changes the way that these businesses are actually taxed. Currently, cannabis companies are taxed on gross profit, basically not allowed to deduct traditional operating expenses, which you can see can lead to an effective tax rate double than what a traditional company charges. That goes away overnight. Section 280E would, alleviate a lot of pressures, lead to far more predictable cash flow. More predictable cash flow means likely easier credit financing, tighter credit spreads, et cetera. A huge, huge push for the industry. But outside of what we're looking for as investors and what we get excited about on that side, David, I wonder if you can spend a little bit of time talking about some of the incremental changes that we could expect post rescheduling.
Well, you laid it out really, really well, Tibby. And let me just put a exclamation point on one of the points you made, which is that this is going to make our job on Capitol Hill and in state capitals, socializing this issue and talking about cannabis reform issues so much easier if they move it to Schedule 3. I cannot tell you how many offices I've been into over the years who have said to me, I am not comfortable talking to you about a Schedule 1 drug that's sitting next to heroin and loosening federal restrictions on this. Now, if the science and this rescheduling effort that's going on right now points to the fact that it should be lower, come back and see me. We can have a conversation. But I think rescheduling opens the door to a relatively swift passage of the Safe Banking Act. I also think and hope that we really start to think about a one plant solution for this, and we can take Representative Dave Joyce's bill, which is the Prepares Act. You've got this on your slide, and really move that initiative along, which is a 12-month interagency review of how this product should be regulated. And then, of course, there's all the other bells and whistles that go along with incremental reform that we need to be tackling that are above and beyond the Safe Banking Act. And that's access to reasonably priced capital. It's uplisting on the U.S. exchanges, which it's un-American that U.S. companies can't do that now. So these are all things that need to be fixed, but we really need to be thinking about this plant comprehensively, Tivi. And I think there's a lot of discussion right now about acting legislatively about certain parts of the plant. I would much prefer, instead of a knee-jerk reaction, for us to think about this comprehensively and tackle it accordingly.
And so, what comes next? Let's say you do get rescheduling by the end of the year or Q1. What are you guys going to be focused on after that?
Yeah, so I think for me, what I would really like to do is if rescheduling does happen before the end of the year, let's just play that hypothetical out. I would like to create a political effort that is focused on the 2026 elections and the 2028 elections. For 2026, we'd be running campaigns in key districts and just generally here in Washington, focused on getting those incremental measures that I tick through done at a minimum through at the beginning of 2027. So really modeling, maybe not to the same financial figure that the crypto industry spend, but a similar playbook for the 2026 cycle to make sure that that incremental reform gets done. Now, leading up to 2028, I want to run a bigger campaign that's focused on the Republican presidential nominee that positions he or she to run on a pro cannabis agenda that is very different to what the Democrats have run on, which is focused on public safety and focused on limiting access to kids and a states' rights approach. So politicians are going to have the ability to say, I'm not for this, but if my state wants it, we've got the federal protections that are in place to make sure that kids are not getting their hands on this and products are not adulterated. That's what we should have done a long time ago. And I want, if we can get the Republican nominee positioned in that way, then we're going to neutralize the Democrats on this issue. They're going to act on this. And 2029 could be the big year for the industry that we've all been waiting for.
Yep. No, super, super insightful, Dave. Thank you so much as always for giving us the inside scoop on what's going on in DC and for really doing the work that much of the industry has not done over the past few years, that it seems like everyone's really starting to get their act together and come together in a meaningful way to lobby this administration appropriately and get reform that's desperately needed. But at this point, in Key's life, our major theme is control the controllables. We can't control what's going to happen in DC, but we see what's happening on the ground, and we believe there's still a lot to be excited about. So we're going to transition slightly right now, Dave, to just a quick regulatory landscape and investment landscape update. That'll take a few minutes, and then we'll go into a potential maybe 2 or 3 question Q&A. And then for everyone joining, we'll pause there. That'll be the end of part 1 of the webinar right now, and then we'll give folks some time to gear up for part 2, where we'll be going through investment opportunities that we're seeing today. So Dave, just hold tight with us. Jordan and I are going to go through these couple slides, and then we'll stop for a Q&A. Appreciate everyone's interest in here. This is really kind of one of my favorite slides. I think it really captures the story of cannabis legalization across the U.S. over time. Look, federal reform has moved more slowly than anybody had hoped, but the real momentum's been at the state level. A vast majority of Americans live in a state with some form of legal cannabis, whether medical, adult use, or hemp derived. At the same time, we see consumer behavior shifting. Alcohol consumption is trending down, while cannabis adoption continues to increase, anywhere from young professionals to retirees. One of the fastest growing segments we see, which we touched on, is senior citizens, really discovering the therapeutic value and replacing or reducing prescription drugs, alcohol, and opioids. What's driving this growth is not just legalization, but normalization. We think the stigma is really starting to fade fast. People who would have never touched the illicit market or gone to a drug dealer, they're now walking into dispensaries. They're being introduced to a much broader product universe, edibles, beverages, topicals, tinctures, and more. It's just not only a smoker category only. And if you look at the timeline at the bottom of the slide here, the inflection point is clear. We're shifting rapidly from medical only markets in blue to full adult use markets, what you see in green. When a state transitions from medical to recreational, the TAM explodes overnight. You can imagine folks that must have a medical license to go out and purchase marijuana. All of a sudden, anybody 21 and up and over, really exciting time for a state to be transitioning there. And what we see happen is that the black market demand typically shifts towards the legal market. Tax dollars increase, and the industry becomes more institutional and investable. Look, at this point, federal reform is no longer a theoretical debate. It's a timing debate. We view full federal normalization as a matter of when, not if. If the current administration has already signaled their intent to make good on its campaign promise, as we just discussed. So when we talk about the time is now at the top of this slide, it's not just a slogan. It's a moment where fundamentals are really improving, consumer adoption is accelerating, and valuations are still sitting near historic lows. Jordan, in this next slide, is going to walk you through the investment case and why this industry is so uniquely mispriced relative to the opportunity ahead. From there, we'll jump into some Q&A and then we'll pause and then get started on part 2 of the webinar. Jordan, floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Tibby, and thanks, Dave, for that really thoughtful conversation. This chart here shows, oh, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. This chart here shows the amount of cannabis sales on the green bars and the stock price performance of the CNBS Cannabis ETF on the blue line. You can see that the public markets have declined consistently since market sentiment cooled off in 2021, when it became clear that despite the blue wave of the 2020 election, that federal regulatory reform would not be taking place quickly. That said, as Dave was discussing earlier, because the market was so excited following that blue wave, we did see over a 350% increase in public prices during that time period, based simply on speculation that regulations would change. You can see that over the last few months of 2025, prices have recovered a bit since news leaked in the Wall Street Journal that the Trump administration intends to move forward with rescheduling. The day after that was the press conference that Tibby alluded to earlier when Trump received the question about rescheduling. And so this chart perfectly highlights why we are so excited about this investment vintage. The industry is larger than ever. There are more hard assets to acquire, yet valuations are cheaper and capital is scarcer than ever before. We believe this vintage has the opportunity to be the one that perfectly threads the needle, in which we invest prior to rescheduling and then exit those investments post-regulatory reform and a rebound in valuations. With that, I'll pass it back to Tibby.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. So for everyone joining, this now concludes the regulatory and landscape update portion of the webinar. We'll open it to a couple of questions right now. Feel free to send those in the chat. We can see them and read them off. Once we conclude those, we'll move forward on part 2 of the webinar, Investing in Cannabis and Key's Approach. We did have one question off the bat. I think that you did touch on it a bit, Dave, but what other incremental changes in the area of banking law would you potentially expect, maybe beyond safe banking? Maybe we can focus on access to institutional capital and ultimately uplisting.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it's those two that would be above and beyond safe banking. There's a piece of legislation that has been introduced previously called the Climb Act that does tackle that. I'm also very interested to see if post rescheduling, there's some sort of guidance that Treasury puts out, not just about when their 280E tax relief occurs, and or if there's a look back period, but also if there is any further guidance that they can provide that would make the access to reasonably priced capital more reasonable, and of course uplisting on the U.S. exchanges. But those are the three in my mind in the financial services sector that need to be tackled.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions rolling in, so let's go ahead and conclude this portion of the webinar. Mr. Culver, we appreciate you as always for joining.
Thanks for having me, Tippy. Great to be with you.
Thank you, sir.